Let's get this started. All right. Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to Blast IU 17's online learning hub. Just so you know, I just muted everybody. Becky, you might want to unmute yourself before before you try to present. Today we are featuring Filling Your Plate with TPACK with Rebecca Gibney, who is our curriculum and online learning specialist. She goes by Becky, I think, to most of her friends, which would be everybody on the recording. You want to introduce yourself at all, Becky?
Yeah, no, I jumped on board at the IU in July, and I'm curriculum and online learning specialist. So really eager with our team here, Scott and Aaron, to put together this series to help you in any way as you make this shift in education.
Great. So before we get started, just a few reminders. Again, I did mute everybody, but we just ask everyone to stay muted during the presentation to avoid feedback. Unless you have a comment to make, then you can unmute yourself. Just a quick tutorial on that. If you hover over your window on the bottom left corner, you can see your mute button and also a button to stop your video. So with that in mind as well, we are going to be recording this session for future use. If you do not feel comfortable with possibly having your video in that recording, you can turn off your camera. But keep in mind that one of our goals with these webinars is to build community and human interaction. So if you are able and comfortable, we encourage you to keep your camera on throughout the session. That really helps with that feeling of isolation when you're stuck at home for weeks at a time. Today's session will be in a presentation format, then followed by a Q&A session at the end. In the chat box, which you can find if you hover over your video again, at the bottom there's a chat box. There is a link to the presentation, and you can follow along with that link, or you can just watch the presentation that Becky is presenting. At the conclusion of this webinar, we will put a feedback form in the chat box as well for you to complete, and this form will help us understand your needs and also account for attendance in today's session if necessary at a future time. All right, with that in mind, any questions before we get started from anybody?
Ah, meu Deus. Ó, eu vou te falar uma parada.
Okay. Without any further ado, then I'd like to turn it over to Becky to get started.
All right, good morning, everyone. I'm excited to have you here this morning to fill your plate with TPACK. Not sure how many of you are familiar with TPACK, but hopefully by the end of today, you will get a better understanding and just a framework for thinking as you shift your instruction from face-to-face to remote learning. Also, this is very beneficial in the classroom as well. So I am going to have you open up another tab if you can. You don't have to, but it would be nice if you've been part of my presentations at the IU. I like to be very interactive. So the whole remote learning is a little bit of a challenge, but I found ways to be a little bit interactive. So if you can open up a new tab and go to www.menti.com, or if you're in the presentation, just click that link. Just have that tab up because we're going to do some online surveying and things like that as we go through.
Becky, they could also use their cell phone if it's easier than new tab.
Yeah, sorry. Yes, you may definitely, thank you, Erin, use your cell phone as well. I'll give you the link coming up here, or the code. So when I started thinking about this, I started to empathize with you guys and think, all right, if I'm a teacher, what are my biggest worries? When I'm talking content-wise and my teaching and things like that, I understand we're all worried about, kids, are they getting a good night's sleep? Are their parents at home? Are all of those things. But with that aside, we all know, and I read a blog last night, we all know education, it's not going to be the same. So I'm not trying to replicate that. But this whole presentation is the idea that what you did in the classroom, how can we make it somewhat similar and relatable in remote learning? So with TPACK, there's technological, pedagogical, and then content. So my biggest question for you right now, when I started to empathize with you guys on what my biggest concerns are you concerned about technology? Like, maybe you're not as comfortable with technology. Are you concerned that you're going to lose content? Or are you concerned perhaps that you're going to lose some of those pedagogical skills that you have? For example, I like making everything interactive. So for me, as a presenter, that's something that I had to really focus on and think about. In the classroom, sometimes we worry about, I'm going to lose my content because these kids aren't necessarily going to be on the screen all day. So what I'm going to have you do is on the menti.com, I'm going to start this poll. And what I'd like you to do is, there's some directions to get onto it. And the code is 856261. So you just type that code in, and I'd like you to answer the question, what is your biggest concern? Is it technology? Is it content? Is it pedagogy? And I'll give you a little bit of time to do that. And as you see this, this website is free for you to use. It's called mentimeter.com. I can put that in the chat. It is limited with the free version, but this word cloud, you can see biggest concerns, the more that people are saying it, the bigger the word gets with the word cloud. So it seems, as we're building this community of webinars here and community among our region, this is really good for Scott, Aaron, and myself to look at as well, and for you guys to see how we can support each other. Good. Okay. So just to get a sense of the room here and see where we're at and what people are nervous about. And it's okay to be nervous. I think that's important for all of us to understand that it is okay. If you keep this open, I'm going to move to the next slide here in a little bit. We have another question as well. So with TPACK, TPACK stands for Technological, Pedagogical, and Content Knowledge. So I know those are a lot of big words, and you think, how can I manage all of them? But this TPACK is a frame, the A, everyone always asks, the A stands for and. But this is a framework like SAMR, if you're familiar with SAMR, of how to find the perfect balance with ed technology and ed tech. So I know this is a little blurry, but if you look here, they put it in Venn diagrams so that we have, technological knowledge, which is TK, content knowledge, and pedagogical knowledge. And when they overlap, so for example, right here in your lessons, maybe you have a really good lesson that has technology and really good pedagogical knowledge. And so when they overlap, you're using both of them at once in a lesson. And so we already do this in the classroom. We already do it. For example, in your lessons, you might use, Flipgrid and building community, which is, one of the pedagogical ways of teaching. So, that's the TK, the technological pedagogical knowledge. These are mouthfuls. What we're aiming to do is hit what's called the sweet spot, which is right there. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. So what educators and what leaders are finding with TPACK is we're not saying that every single lesson needs to be hitting the sweet spot, which is TPACK right in there, all three combined, but you need to be aware of where certain things are falling in your lessons. And there's no better way to hit the technology one than remote learning. So right now, what I'm going to have you do is go back to your Menti, and right in there, I'm going to put it in here. What ways do you use technology in your lessons already? So when you were back in the classroom, maybe you don't, and that's okay to put that out there. Your name's not attached to this, but it's the same code. What ways do you use technology, or did you use technology? It could be apps or websites, or it could be resources you pull in, Discovery Ed, things like that, Study Island. Go ahead and fill those in. Don't worry about complete sentences. Okay. Nearpod, good. Lots of Google, that's good. Great. I like this one during social skills lessons to show videos of different skills. That's great. YouTube videos. Awesome. So what I want you to think about is that just because now you have to have an open mind. I feel like I keep saying this out of the box thinking every webinar series, but you have to keep in mind that it might change a little bit, but technology, all of these things you did in the classroom, you can still do with remote learning. So now obviously maybe not with a smart board, your board's not right there, but think outside the box as we continue through this presentation, but keep this in your back pocket because what technology do you already use, you can use again. So for me, when I was in my classroom, I was a Spanish teacher for 9 years at Loyalsock. And an instructional coach, for me, I used different apps like Flipgrid, and they did a lot of blogging and Google Earth and Skype. Now, obviously, I wouldn't have my kids Skype one-on-one at their house. That's a little, I liked being able to vet that. But Flipgrid, things like that, I could still use. So the next thing I want you to think about, and we're going to go to the next slide, is your content knowledge. So what content, and I know this one has content and pedagogy. This was the problem with Menti. With the free version, you only get like 4 slides and you have to invite a friend. So I invited, Brooke, and I'm like, just ignore the email. But don't answer pedagogy right now, but what content do you use in your course right now? If you were to go back into school tomorrow, which I know we wouldn't really be teaching right away, but maybe next week, what would be some content you would cover in your class? For me, for example, it was culture. Verb conjugation. What content? Ecology? Or maybe what's the last lesson you left with? For those of you that are doing review and enrichment, what's the last lesson you left with? Reading comprehension, math and science. Poetry, narratives, good. Classroom management. Oh, rational root theorem. I feel like I remember that, like from high school, middle school days. Sounds familiar to me. All right. Good. Like I said, for me in my classroom, it was, the culture, verb conjugations. Again, all of those things, depending on what your district's planning on doing, you don't have to lose that. You don't have to lose your content, just like you don't have to lose technology. If your district's choosing the enhancement and enrichment and working on skills, you can tighten some of these skills based on your content. If you're doing the planned instruction, your district, and they're choosing to move forward, you have your content right here. What I'd like you to do right now is think about some pedagogy. What are some practices you did in the classroom? Like if I asked you, and I know Jen Cuzio is on this call right now, I think, but we were talking about this with our student teachers. When we talk about pedagogy and people say, how do you teach? What's your style? She brought that up. I thought that was a good way to wrap it around. When we talk about pedagogy, I told you I like interactive or think, pair, shares, or debates, things like that. I want you to think about what is your style of teaching, and then go ahead and add another bubble. You should be able, I think, Scott, maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, but or Aaron, you should be able to add another response right here to your pedagogy. Is that allowing you? Okay, good. So what are some things that you do in your classroom that you don't really want to lose, or what is your style of teaching? Group discussions, good. Another one for me was like, here's partner work, collaborative pairs. For me, a lot of it was reflection too, goal setting. Student-centered. Open-ended questions, good. I love strategies, partner tasks, whole group, hands-on, field trips. A lot of those are free right now. I have a teacher that's working right now. I don't know if you guys noticed, but the zoos all have like live hours and they feature an animal every day. So one of the teachers that's working with me, she's having her nephews watch the zoo. So that's pretty cool. Great. Again, I'm sure you can guess what I'm going to say. Some of these things might have to look a little different, and it'll take a learning curve, but you can still hold these things true remotely. And it's just a matter of thinking outside the box and talking with, Erin, Scott, and I are here to help with, how do I make a small group? How do I make that learning happen virtually? And so I think that's really important. Or even like the field trips. How do I make field trips happen virtually? Because eventually when we go back to school, you could just carry all of these ed tech lessons back to the classroom. And I think that's really important to remember. And this afternoon, a lot of you guys wrote group discussions, small group discussions. This afternoon, we have the Zoom session and webcasting, and we're going to talk about, some breakout rooms. How do we make small group rooms? That's one of my things that I've learned that I really enjoyed with Zoom currently. So good. So the next thing I'm going to show you here, this in the presentation is actually linked. So if you're on the presentation, I didn't want to expand it because then it gets all blurry and the graphic gets messed up. But if you look, these are some examples of how you could reach TPACK, either in your classroom or back remotely, or right now remotely, I should say. You guys have some great examples, but here are some other examples. So if you just click on the image, it'll take you right to the website. And you can see, again, I'm not saying that every single lesson you deliver is going to be right here in the sweet spot in TPACK, but being aware is what is the most important. And right now as educators, as we're making the learning curve, because we have to learn first as well, you might be most comfortable with content knowledge, and that's okay. But in order to have that growth mindset and push you a little bit, we have to think about, okay, how could I do that with some pedagogy, or how could I do that right now, especially with technology? And that's why also our Friday chat with the coffee and chat, feel free to jump in. We've moved those to an hour long. And so bring an idea to the table. Hey, we talked about TPACK earlier this week. I want to try this content and this pedagogical, I never know if it's pedagogy, same thing, tomato. But, I want to try this, and this. And it's just a think tank. That's what our Friday discussions are for. So, again, raising awareness, thinking about how could I start doing this to eventually get maybe one lesson in TPACK. So for me, when I was doing this, now it's going to be all to fill your plate, it's like dessert, the sweet spot right here in the middle. That's what you want to try to get. So in my classroom, again, every unit was not a TPACK unit. Okay. But for example, it might be my students using project-based learning, okay, to learn about a culture and share it using a technology app, website. They could do their own blog. They could talk about it on Flipgrid, all of those different ways. And that's how I ended up at, for example, the sweet spot. So I want to give you about a minute, because we're going to do some question and answer, but I want to give you about a minute or two to think about, what's an upcoming lesson, or what is the last lesson? We all just brainstormed them. but how could maybe you see it fit together? Maybe you had an aha and you're like, oh, I could do this content with, if you're familiar with Flipgrid, or even this content, the kids have to write it in a Google Doc and share it to me. It does not have to be super technological. So go ahead and just think how you might move forward with what we just sort of discussed and shared out. Thanks, Scott, for posting that website in there for me. Okay, does anyone want to share sort of their takeaway, or, you know, maybe an idea that you had? We're all one here. All right. Well, keep thinking about that. And again, Erin and Scott are here to help with any, you know, as your lesson planning and thinking about, you know, the right balance of ed tech. At this time, we're going to open it up for some question and answers, unless Erin and Scott, you have anything to add about that content and TPACK.
If there's anyone on the Zoom that is from working with elementary students, one way I was able to find that sweet spot in my elementary classroom was with the use of the technology Seesaw. My students would often write stories and turn it into myself, and I was their only audience for their story, and so it didn't give them motivation. But when we started using the technology of Seesaw, it allowed the pedagogy of collaborating with their peers, and now I wasn't their only audience. It was seen by all of the peers in their classroom, and they were given positive feedback back and forth with their writing. So it was a way to find a sweet spot in the elementary classroom. So I agree with Becky that, you know, this day and age is a little different than we're used to being face to face, but there are ways to hit that sweet spot even with this.
Just to add to that, I would be make sure you're not afraid to miss the sweet spot. You know, yeah, you're gonna have to try out some stuff, and it's gonna probably, you know, need adjusting after you try it out the first time, but you're never gonna find that sweet spot on the first shot. You know, just like anything else, it takes a little practice, and the more time you spend thinking through it and working on it and doing it, the faster you're gonna find those areas that you're like, this is working, this is great. So
Yeah, and I think I'm not sure who put it in the chat because it's KTAKACH.
Kristen Takish,
Thank you.
Williamsport, I think.
Thank you. I think that's a really great point that she brings up in the chat, is that there's this huge push right now for technology. And that's why, you know, when Scott and I were building these webinars, and Erin, we were thinking like, oh my gosh, these teachers are inundated with free resource. But we're urging you, don't forget your content and your pedagogy. That's what makes you you, right? That's why we teach. The technology is just the bonus. Well, we see it as a bonus, but for now, I know sometimes it's a little nerve-wracking. So I think that she brings up a great point, that time spent developing your pedagogy is just going to enhance your content, and then using the technology right now, that's just, you know, the way of how it needs to go. Yeah. Elementary student websites to use. Erin, do you have any other ones that you're thinking about? A list of resources that we were working on.
I do. Who was
Teresa.
interested in that?
Teresa.
I can get your email, Teresa, and send you a few resources. We could even chat separately if you'd prefer that, but I spent 15 years in elementary classrooms, so I feel like I have a lot that I've tried in certain groups it works really great with, other groups it doesn't, and I agree with Mrs. Takash that sometimes it's you getting familiar with it that makes it work. You know, it can be a really great program, but if you're not comfortable with it or familiar with it as much, as it's not going to be as easy and great for you. So I'd be happy to share a list of resources that I have for you, or some things that I will use that work. Sure.
Erin, I'm glad you bring that up as well. We talked about this yesterday a little bit, but in my opinion, I know you're going to have to share new things with students, but right now is not the time to inundate students either with brand new things. Like, if it's low risk and easy and they can venture out and try it, great. But you don't want to cause frustration on the student end, because that's going to cause frustration then possibly on parent ends. So keep with what's familiar with your students and how you reach them. Any other questions?
Hey,
Teresa, I see your email right here, so I will be sure to get that to you this afternoon.
Scott?
I said just feel free to you can unmute your microphones too if anyone has any more questions. But is that, okay.
Oh, that's awesome. Thanks, Tom, for letting us know about the camera. Reach out to your tech department. Maybe they have a camera that you could use. Yeah.
Okay. Well, if there's no more questions, feel free to reach out to all of us individually if you have anything else. I'm posting in the chat just a few links. There's 3 links there, and then also our email addresses that you can certainly ask us questions. The 3 links, the first one is a feedback form for today's session, so please just take a moment to fill that out. It won't take you long. It'll help our direction as far as where we're going, and also provide some accountability that you were here today. The second link is the website with our future and upcoming webinars for the next week and a half or so, and that will be continually updated as we schedule out for the rest of the spring, really. And the things we're going to bring to you guys. And finally, there's a suggestion form there. If you have any topic at all that you are interested in learning about or hearing about, please submit that suggestion form, and we will take it into consideration because we're always looking for what you guys need as teachers and educators, especially in this time. And then there's our email addresses, so feel free to, again, ask us any questions you may have. All right. Becky, Aaron, anything else to add before we close up today?
Did you put it in there?
Didn't I?
I don't know.
Wait, I sent it to Aaron just individually. Whoops.
Oh, I was like, wait a minute. I think I have it.
Just one more time.
There you go.
There you go. So Aaron can fill it all out because she's the only one who gets them today.
Perfect.
Don't forget to join us at 1 o'clock today too for the Zoom. It will be really helpful, I believe.
That's right.
Yes,
Yeah.
are you doing Zoom and Google or just Zoom? I can't remember.
I'm gonna talk about Zoom and Google, but the practical steps will be just Zoom because that's what we're using, and it'll be much easier than trying to run like 2 webinars simultaneously.
Yeah, and please remember, guys, that all this webinar series is free and open to anyone in the education world. So even if you have a sibling, like a sister, brother, administrator, whoever that is in states away, they can jump on as well.
All right.
We'll stay on a little bit if you have any other personal, or not personal questions. I mean, any other pertinent questions that you want to ask us. And also so you can gather the feedback form.
Becky, there's a question there for you about sharing the screen where everyone on